1st, 2021. Man, that's hard to say. This council work session will be conducted virtually with council members conferencing into Centerview. In consideration of COVID-19 cases in Cass County and the city of Raymore, the public is encouraged to participate from home. There is limited space available in Harrelson Hall should the public wish to attend. The public can view the meeting live by going to www.raymore.com/video. We'll go ahead and start the meeting. We have a couple of items on the agenda tonight. The first item is the staffing study presentation. I'll turn it over to Mr. Fearborn.
Thank you, Your Honor, and I'm going to immediately turn it over to a man who needs no introduction since he's introduced himself to the entire council now. Patrick, take it away.
Thank you so much, Mr. Fearborn. Good evening, everyone. I hope everybody's family is healthy and safe. Thank you so much for the opportunity to present this to you virtually tonight. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And so let me do that. Give me 1 second here. And then I've got two monitors here in my office. I'm based outside of Phoenix in Glendale, Arizona. So I put together just a handful of slides to show the highlight reel of the report. Before I get started, I wanted to say thank you to Mr. Fearborn, Mr. Ike for all their cooperation and input. You know, doing projects like this, in addition to other things they have to do, can be somewhat time consuming. So I appreciate their time and the time of their staff, the information they provided. And what I want to do to share with you tonight is walk through what we found in the assessment, and then more importantly, what our recommendations were. And I want to make this as informal as possible. So please feel free to pause or raise your hand or just say, hey, Patrick, I got a question or I got a comment. Okay, so I'm going to try to make this as informal as possible. You can see, I'm sure you recognize these photographs. They're lifted straight from different sites. So, and Mejorando, the name of my firm, Mejorando Group, Mejorando Spanish, it means getting better all the time. So, and we've been in business since 2002. So let me just go over some preliminary information about my firm, so you can get a sense. We provide, since 2002, consulting, facilitation, and training services to public sector organizations exclusively all across the country. I'm a sole proprietor, but I assemble talent around projects. And I'm a former city manager. I've spent 15 years in the business in cities all across the country in every time zone. And we have extensive experience and in-depth expertise in designing and implementing performance improvement strategies and practices similar to this staffing study. And we worked in a number of cities the size of Raymore. As I shared with Jim and Mike when we first started this, when I was in city government back in the day, I worked for the city of Emporia, Kansas, which I'm sure you're familiar with, as an assistant to the city manager. But every city I worked in as in city management were all cities under the population of 25,000. So I have a deep appreciation for the versatility and dexterity that you must possess in an organization that size, where you have to go an inch wide and a mile deep and a mile wide and an inch deep like that. Also worked in growth communities all around the country. So just that background and experience, I think, helps me as a resource to your executive team and to you as mayor and council in assessing the staffing levels and making recommendations. But just wanted to share just a little bit about that. And this is just a little bit more about my firm and the portfolio of services that we have. I mentioned this earlier. The Chiefs logo behind me is, I'm not trying to be shameless. I grew up in the, as I affectionately call, the mean streets of Gladstone. I'm a graduate of Central Missouri State. I'm a diehard Chiefs and Royals fan. And I think just because this is the week, I'm going to leave that logo up there. But I remember the lean seasons. And so we could talk about football all night, but I won't. But I just wanted to share with you. And I always love coming back to the Midwest. All my family's there. My wife's from Illinois. So it was a joy to come back, even though COVID was happening, to just spend some time. And when you grow up in an area, and I've done work in different Midwestern cities, having a sense of the roots and the legacy and tradition, I think just helps me as a consultant understand the dynamics and the heritage of communities. So that's always woven in to the recommendations. One thing I love about the Midwestern cities is they're just so incredibly responsible and so incredibly practical, and they cannot not be responsible. The challenge sometimes, though, in the Midwest, and I say this with all due affection, is sometimes they're not bold enough because we're so pragmatic. And so what I try to do with the cities I've worked in, I've worked up and down the central time zone, east, west, mountain. I'm always trying to relate where they are as a community, as well as trying to build on that. So the way we tried to look at this staffing study was to capitalize on your strengths. You're doing many things well. Our approach was to how can you accelerate those? And staffing is one resource. So I just share that with you. Those are the kind of the nuances and subtleties that sometimes people in my business don't always appreciate unless they've actually lived or worked in the industry or that part of the country. So I just share that with you. Our framework that we looked at was this whole dynamic about leadership and culture, but trying to look at how do you optimize performance. So we looked a little bit at the departments, the Public Works, Parks and Recreation, and Police. We looked at their strategy. I'm going to go clockwise here. What's their strategic focus? And you've got a really well-developed strategic plan that the departments, in particular, each year through the fiscal year, they identify goals and objectives within their department that are linked to the strategic plan. I think that's terrific. I do a lot of strategic planning facilitation. You have that linkage, that connection between departments in your strategic plan. So their strategy is there. Going clockwise, their structure, which is one of the things we looked at. One of the challenges you have because of the size of your organization is you're fairly flat. That's both the strength and a challenge in regards to upward mobility from some members of your staff. There's not a lot of places for people to go in your departments. I'll come back to that in a little bit. The third one is service delivery. We looked at how are their services. Government does a lot of things well. One of the things that's challenged by what does it decide to stop doing? Your plates and platters, a tray. There's always the expansion, and sometimes in local government, it's the peanut butter approach. Take some and spread it out to everybody. And when we looked at the portfolio of your services for those departments, we found that some might need to be revisited. And it's not about the people that deliver them. It's just that sometimes services have an expiration date. And I'll come back to that in a little bit as well. And then the HR systems, which is really not about the HR department, but how's the city attracting and developing its talent? All 100 plus employees. And you're an employer. And sometimes that kind of gets lost in the shuffle in local government, that not only you're a democratic institution responsible for delivering services in an equitable way within your jurisdiction, you're also an employer competing for talent. So I'll come back to that as well, just some of those recommendations. So this is what we looked at. We touched on a little bit about leadership and also about culture. Again, there's no perfect performance. We're trying to help you optimize your performance. What does that look like? So I just share with you, this is the lens that we used. The next several slides are in the report, and I just thought it would be helpful tonight just to share some of the data points. I know you're familiar with this. I think, though, the data is in and by itself, it doesn't mean a whole lot. What we tried to do was leverage the data and say, how does that strengthen the analysis going into this with no preconceived notions? We weren't sure what departments, needed staffing. We don't go into it blind, but we're not making assumptions before we get there. And the data really starts to be revealing. And I hope that as you read the report, some of those data tables you stopped and looked at and said, wow, we didn't know that either till we really examined it. So I just want to go over some of this. You're familiar with this. Your city has grown tremendously, and you're still not at build out. There's dividends of growth. There's unintended consequences of growth. You're living really in three worlds, I think, in city government: the past, the present, and the future. There's dimensions that you inherit from your predecessors. There's the world that you live in today, and then there's the world of tomorrow. You've got a tremendous amount of residential development going, and we know residential development is an anchor, and then here comes more commercial and maybe light industrial development, which means more vehicular traffic, higher generation of sales tax, also an increasing demand on your facilities. One of the things that we found in the Parks and Recreation, which was a good trend but also a challenge, was because of COVID, more people were spending time out at the parks. You love that, right? At the same time, it's increasing wear and tear on the parks. So as local government is a demand-based business model, the demand is up. Business is good in Raymore because of population, right? That generates a certain impact. And when you look at the size of the city, and we looked at Mr. Feuerborn and Mr. Ike, we looked at different comparable cities. We wanted to find not apples to apples, but wanted to look at other cities in the Kansas City metropolitan area that were relatively similar in size and portfolio. There's nobody exactly like Raymore, right? Because you set the standard in your community. But there's those that are comparable. So we looked at Gladstone, where I grew up, Raytown, which is one of your neighbors, Belton, another of your neighbors, and Grandview, another neighbor, all similar population levels. And this is what we found, that you're the largest of square miles. You're probably not surprised at that. And by itself, that doesn't mean a whole lot. But square miles often translates to more lane miles, more areas to cover for police, more areas for public works, So it's not just how big a city is. It's obviously that's one of the factors. But then as I share on the next slide, there's other aspects about parks and recreation that is impacted. And I'm just going to go through these just to share with you. And these might be statistics you've not seen before. One of the things that Nate and I were working on around Parks and Rec was there's an organization called National Recreation Parks Association. It's kind of the industry for people in local government in that business of leisure services, parks and recreation. Periodically, they go out and sample their members, their jurisdictions, and their individual members. And what we referenced in the report was data that came out really within the last year, a study about some of these numbers. Now, the challenge in local government is there's really no gold standards. However, there are some data points that we think are relevant. And so we looked at the acres of parkland per 1,000 residents. You have the most acres of parkland per 1,000 residents. You love that, right? That's a good number. Going clockwise, you also have by far and away the highest number of athletic fields. What do athletic fields require? Maintenance, grass, the infield, dugouts. I mean, just go on and on, right? Athletic fields, these are active parks. Remember, there's passive parks, there's active parks. So with athletic fields, there's demand. You love it when there's kids are out there playing ball, right? There's also adults, but it's wear and tear on the fields. And then do you need lights? And all that what correlates to the number of athletic fields. It's not as back in the day where we mowed the grass and that was it. Like some of us grew up with, right? That was it. They do a lot more. Your Parks and Recreation staff does a lot more to maintain those fields, whether it's drying out the grass or tending to the infield, everything else that goes along with that. Going clockwise, the number of acres of parkland per maintenance worker. You also have the highest, which means that because you have the largest number of acres of parkland per maintenance worker, that's quite a workload based on your number of employees. That's not necessarily a good number. So what I tried to make the argument in the report was the higher number is not always a good thing. What it means is it increases the volume of work for those employees in that department. I'm not trying to overcomplicate it, but I'm just trying to articulate that sometimes numbers are revealing they're not always a good thing. They just start to tell us about the portfolio and the volume. And then
Hey,
the final.
Patrick, if I could interrupt.
Yes,
so I noticed
ahead,
on
man.
that particular section, Raytown has dropped off. Did they not have a maintenance worker average?
So some of the data points that if you see a city's not included, we asked and I tried not to nag them, but at some point we didn't get information back. They were all very cooperative and I offered to each of those departments, all cities, we will actually end up sharing the data that we received from the other cities, just kind of a professional courtesy. But some cities, just remembering we did this in December, it was kind of a compression. You had COVID happening, you had the holidays. Some people weren't able to provide it for us. Nate and Mike and the chief reached out to their colleagues. Some of the data just didn't pop, just didn't arrive. And I didn't want to go back to the well too many times. But by and large, they were very cooperative and provided a lot of data for us,
Okay,
which we
thank
really
you.
appreciate.
I was just curious because my wife runs the Chamber of Commerce in Raytown, and she's probably going to look through this report and wonder, why'd you leave us off there? So I'm just trying to cover
It
my
wasn't-
backside here.
Yeah, there you go. Send her my number, Mayor. I'll give you cover there. So,
Okay.
but again, we tried to, we asked and asked. We just didn't want to bug them too much. Then the number of employees per 10,000 residents, which is a standard. If you see the fifth bar there, the national average of 8.1 employees per 10,000 residents. That was what was generated from National Recreation and Parks Association. You're at 4.9. You're significantly lower than the national average. Now, again, I'm not using the 8.1 as the gold standard. However, it is a reference point. It gives us a gauge. And as do the other cities. As you see, the other cities most of them are below the national average. Now, the portfolio of Parks and Recreation varies based on where you are in the country, but we're trying to account for that as we look at these standards. So that's some information about Parks and Recreation. In short, business is good, volume is increasing, you're having more events, you're also getting more foot traffic, more ball games, you're expanding both the number of parks and what's happening at the parks. At the same time, the staffing levels for the parks is not where it should be, I would offer, to keep up with the volume of work. And I'll come back to the recommendations a little bit later. Let's transition into the police department. This are some the patrol service levels. All these tables are in the report as well, as I'm sure that some of these look familiar. I just try to capture a snapshot of workload. We're not judging that more is better or less is worse. Obviously, 2020 was a bit of an anomaly because self-initiated calls were reduced because of COVID. So that's a bit of an outlier, right, this past year. And that may be that way for a while, just depending on COVID. But this just gives you some notion of the volume of workload for police. And you see about vehicle stops and citations issued, reports taken, the number of accidents, the alarm calls, and domestic violence calls. Not surprisingly, as a national standard, not a good thing either, domestic violence calls increased substantially in a lot of jurisdictions, including yours, during COVID, and they probably will continue. Not a good sign, but that's one of the trends that's national. Just sharing this with you. Data by itself, again, we're just offering that these are some workload measures, just to give you some sense. Also I wanted to share with you, and this is, again, the International Association Chiefs of Police, which is the primary industry for people in law enforcement, International Association Chiefs of Police. You may have heard Chief Zimmerman talk about that, IACP. They conduct a tremendous amount of research. What they've generated is the national average of number of sworn officers per 1,000 residents is 2.5. Now, they also qualify it that it's not the gold standard. However, it is a reference point. You see all the jurisdictions are below that, including yours at 1.3, which is substantially less than what the national average is for your staffing levels. Business has been, again, good. I don't mean that in a pejorative way. I mean, I don't mean that in a glib way, but the volume of police with the population increases, more traffic citations, more accidents, more bad checks. Go down the list. Business is good. The staffing levels for the police department have not necessarily been where they could have been to keep in line. And as we know with police, as Chief Zimmerman has shared, I'm sure shared with you, going on a call for service with the customization that you want in a community your size, the department is spread out to try to be both programmatically involved, whether it's bike patrol or other activities. So there's patrol activities. There's the detectives unit about how they're following up on investigations and conducting investigations. There's patrol officers, and you like to see them at different events as well as within the schools, a school resource officer. So there's no shortage of demands being placed on those in the police department. At the same time, what's mission critical are calls for service. And that's going to continue. And when you look at the staffing levels, what I would offer, they're below the national average, which means you're trying to play catch up a little bit on service calls. Yes.
Thank you. Just a quick question. I'm wondering, and you probably don't know the answers or you would have shared them, but I'm just curious. We can see officers and lots of comparisons for PD with the other cities, but I don't see, and maybe you can point me to where it is in the book if it's there, a comparison between our vehicle stops, calls for service, et cetera, to these cities. Like, how is the demand for officers compared in those other cities?
Yeah, that's a good point. And Chief Zimmerman and I spoke about that. And one of the challenges in police is the nature of this philosophy and the strategy of the police department in that jurisdiction. It's a little bit of a challenge to compare vehicle stops in one jurisdiction with vehicle stops in another jurisdiction because of how they're doing their calls. And I know it may sound odd. Response time may be one metric, but how they're responding to calls and how much time they're spending on calls. And some departments have civilians who are responding to non-injury accidents. So the way they're deploying it. But we talked about that, and we thought it would be better to not include too many of those comps because people may draw the wrong conclusions. Like, well, they're doing more over there. Why aren't we doing more? And some of it, because it's demand-based business, it's not as though the police department's generating a demand. They're responding to it. So if they've got a lot of vehicle stops, and if you have a certain amount in Raymore, but they have more in Grandview, it may be that they're making that a higher priority. Maybe they're doing targeted enforcement. Maybe they're doing more DUI enforcement. So we were careful not to put data in there that people could draw maybe the wrong conclusions, like because your numbers are less, why aren't they doing it? It's a little bit of a challenge, I grant you. And I think it's a good conversation to continue having as a governing body. And one of my recommendations that I'll jump ahead and come back We recommend that all 3 departments start providing more frequent reports to all of you about their volume of work, including some comparisons, including an annual report, a quarterly report, a monthly report. And it's not just to collect data for data's sake, Mayor and Council. It's to start being able to provide some of that and shining a spotlight on work volume and how that might be comparing to their own trends from the previous year, as well as how that might be able to compare to other jurisdictions. So I'm sorry that we can't answer it fully. We did think that through. We just sort of decided that some of those calls for service, just like in parks and public works, there were some data points that we were just a little reluctant to compare apples to apples because we didn't think that it was necessarily a fair comparison.
I've got a question.
Sure.
Patrick, is this the number of sworn officers? Is this assuming that we're fully staffed? I'm not sure if we're fully staffed.
This is assuming you're fully staffed. Yes, you do have some vacancies, right? So we took that number knowing that some were in the academy, some were in the throes of joining the force, but we just used that as essentially the full-time equivalents allocated by the budget to that department. So I'm going to move on, if that's all right. These are calls for service, and what we tried to highlight in the report was about dispatch. As you know, you dispatch for 3 different agencies, including your own. We just wanted to share this for the 2019. We didn't have 2020 because this was all being done at the end of the year, so we didn't have that. Needless to say, the other the other agencies that you provide dispatch services for are about 1/3 of how dispatch is handling those calls. And again, this is a volume-based business. I'll come back about dispatchers as well, because that is a growing trend nationally and has been for some time about dispatchers. I call them the unsung heroes of public safety because they're usually working behind the scenes. Pardon me. Moving on to public works. And again, I just want to remind, there were more tables in the report. I didn't want to overwhelm you tonight by going through all of them. I just thought it would be helpful to grab the highlights, the ones that I thought were most emblematic of our assessment and to help support the recommendations. So it was just a judgment call on my part. This is Public Works workload distribution. Now, one of the things Public Works does, they're the only of the 3, the only certified department. They're certified by the American Public Works Association. And when you're certified, you have to meet certain standards, as you can imagine. One of the standards that Mike and his crew have implemented was about collecting workload volume. So they actually capture, these are input, these are person hours, labor hours, as they're affectionately called. And I circled a few because with the size of staff that you have in Public Works, there's a trade-off. And if you look at snowplow for 2019, you see that number was more than almost, about 70 to 80% more than it was in 2018. Now let's just imagine for a moment, when the crew's out doing snow and ice, there's a trade-off that they're not able to do other services, right? There's only so much time. You're trying to manage overtime. There's only so many people. So when they're doing more of something based on demand and you want them to clear the streets, absolutely, they're not able to spend as much time on other activities. You see how the water and sewer lines. So let me step back for a moment. One of the challenges you're having as a growth community is the lines are going to start timing out about the same time while you're also putting in new lines. So because the community is going through a maturation process of when those water and sewer lines were installed, there's a good chance that unless the maintenance is increased sooner, they may, just like in anybody's water and sewer or in your house, or you're trying to maintain it. One of the comments that Mike and Nate both shared with me, and I'm sure they've shared with you at some point, was their concern is their maintenance and trying to stay up with where it is to keep it where it needs to be to keep it highly functioning. And that's a challenge. And I thought that was a really candid response from both of them, that because they're in a demand-based business, one of the trade-offs is they're not able to be as proactive about their maintenance that they'd like to be. And as you know, when you adopt the budget, there's pay now or pay later, especially those areas that sometimes are not so visible to the public. They're literally underground. And water and sewer typically are that way, obviously roads, and trying to accelerate maintenance. But I just wanted to give you a sample about how their workload, these are all labor hours, so these are inputs. And one of the areas that Mike is doing a really good job of is capturing these labor hours. In fact, Nate and I talked about that in Parks and Rec about how they might be able to do that. And to include in the report, again, one of the outcomes I think that's really beneficial for your directors is, as I mentioned earlier, you know, I'm not one to advocate to collect data just for the sake of collecting it. However, if they can collect it, capture it, analyze it, and report it out to you regularly, I think it gives you a steady diet of work volume. So you're getting just a regular dose of what's going on and how's that department doing, what's trending up, and maybe what's trending down. I think that creates a better, more expansive conversation for you to have, not just at the budget time. So these were the work hours, and Public Works in particular. I think that first number there on the top left, center lane miles, you are far and away have the most center lane miles. Now, when Mike and I talked about that, he was sharing with me that some of these other cities have state highways or county highways that go through their city. They're not responsible. The county takes care of it or MoDOT takes care of it. With lane miles, street and ice control, right-of-way maintenance, just go down the list about what all that obligates the city to. Add that to the 17 plus 0.6 square miles. That's a lot of area to cover for the Public Works crew. Going clockwise here, number of maintenance workers compared to the other jurisdictions, you have 15, second to the lowest, yet at the same time you have the highest number of lane miles. Now, some of those other jurisdictions also do water and sewer. Some don't. There's just strictly a street crew. So when you look, and your crew, highly diverse. One of the areas that I thought was most notable for Public Works that Mike and his superintendent and the crew have done an excellent job. I'm not sure if you're aware of this. They've actually put together an onboarding training program. So when they bring people into the organization, there's actually criteria about which people need to meet to go from a maintenance worker 1 to a 2 to a 3. Really solid training program. That's excellent, by the way. And it's all done in-house. Again, a great way to develop your talent. But the other thing that Public Works does, because of the size of your department, those crew members are highly versatile. Now, that's a good thing. One day they're working on water, the next day on sewer. I'm sure the crew loves that because they want to be outside. And then another day streeting, right? That's the last thing those guys want to do is be inside. They want to be outside. The challenge is that you're not able to devote some full-time crews to some of the maintenance activities that probably require it. Like they want to stay, whether it's hydrant flushing or sewer line maintenance or fire hydrants, some of that, from talking with Mike, they're not able to spend the quality time on those service maintenance. They're getting it, but they're not getting it done in the quality and the efficiency that he'd like to see. Again, I thought that was very candid and revealing. Good for him that he sees that, and he's concerned that because of the growth, the expansion, the nature of maintenance, and the number of crew, trying to divide them up at some point is becoming increasingly a challenge. Similar to what Nate shared, similar to what Chief Zimmerman shared. I'm sure that's not coming as a surprise to any of you. Just business is good. The expansion of the crew and what they're doing, the portfolio is increasing. And then the number of lane miles per maintenance worker. I thought this was an interesting number. There was a national average, APWA, the 12.3. You also have the highest number of lane miles per maintenance worker. Again, that's not necessarily a good thing. What that does, it states that you have the fewer crew members trying to take care of more lane miles. Right, so I tried to put together some data points here that would make reasonable sense. This isn't science, though, right? It's more of a craft. It's blending the data with our perceptions, our analysis, industry standards, input from the department directors, input from the city manager and the assistant, our own assessment and our own expertise. You bundle that all together, you come out on the other side with the assessment and recommendations. So I just want to, it's not a science. This is not totally empirical. It's not like we're doing engineering specs or we're designing a building. There's a little bit more of a subjectivity to it. And that's just the nature of projects like this. Let me move on to the recommendations. The outcome here is to improve the outcomes. Service delivery optimization. I'm going to go clockwise here. First one was the increased staffing levels. We had some pretty healthy recommendations in the report. I'll touch on in just a moment. Mr. Fierborn and I spoke about those. I didn't want to surprise him, have him reading those report. He wasn't surprised when I shared with him the numbers. At the same time, you retain our firm to give you what we think is the most reasonable and practical answer. While it may not always be budgetarily easily expeditious in the short term, you pay us for our advice. We wanted to not shortcut that, so that's why we gave you some of those. That's why we gave you the numbers. And I hope that you receive that in the spirit that we give it. Here are the numbers and based on our analysis. The second one, we think it would be beneficial for Parks and Recreation and the police department to pursue accreditation. Now, it is somewhat time intensive. However, the outcome is it becomes certain standards and standards that those departments can use as a gauge to evaluate how well they're doing against those industry standards. So whether or not you get the certificate, to me, is less important. It's the process by which you can use it for process improvement. Mike in Public Works, they're getting to go through reaccreditation this summer. They have to do it every, I think, 3 or 4 years. It's fairly inexpensive as far as paying for that to APWA. There's just a lot of value in of it as a gauge. One of the challenges in local government, what do you compare yourselves to? There's a Malcolm Baldrige Award, but that even has some challenges. The challenge in local government, there's not profitability, there's not market share, there's not return on investment, there's not shareholder value. So you look to the departments and say, what's the gauge? Accreditation is at least one factor to consider as a gauge to evaluate how well the departments are doing against industry standards. The third one, as I mentioned, is reporting service levels about work volume more regularly, monthly, quarterly, annually. We included samples in our report from other jurisdictions, not about cutting and pasting, but simply as reference documents. We really think it would be helpful in your discussion to expand what it is that you're receiving about the volume of work in those 3 departments, especially trending. Because what we noticed was in the reports, there was few comparisons to previous year's data. How's the department comparing this year to last year? Not to say if the number was higher, it's better, but I think it's helpful for you and your consumption about evaluating what's going on in the community to just have some criteria about which to evaluate. A dashboard, if you will. Not everything, but what are the most meaningful metrics that you think departments can share? So we gave them some samples. And again, I think that's the long-term strategy here. The next one is to modernize talent management practices. So I'll just cut to the chase. In order to build a 21st century workforce, you need a 21st century approach. You've had vacancies for 6 and 7 months. That's not a healthy thing. Talking to people in Parks and Public Works, because I did focus groups with employees, they're really frustrated that people they're hiring in their department, not everyone, but some members that are joining the department can't tell the difference between a regular screwdriver and a Phillips. That's a quote from guys in the crews in Parks and Rec and Public Works. Quotes from police, because I did a focus group with them as well. They're finding that people that joining the department may not have the same commitment to being in law enforcement as other people that have joined it previously. By the way, it's a national trend. It's chronic, trying to get people to join law enforcement. It used to be in the day that people would come out of the military. It was often a kind of a runway into law enforcement. There's so many people leaving the military now, unfortunately, with PTSD, it's an automatic disqualifier. Chief Zimmerman, she and I talked about this, you're sponsoring candidates in the academy really as a strategy to go build your own minor leagues, which is what law enforcement departments are going to have to do. So we gave certain prescriptive ideas in the report about not just HR. It's not just about the HR department. It's an organization-wide imperative about how to strengthen relationships. The police department's put together a career team to go out and be more mobile and elicit and identify more candidates in the community colleges, as well as four-year universities, as well as high schools. You're going to have to go out and build your minor leagues, ladies and gentlemen, in all 3 departments. Trade schools, even unions in the field, trying to build relationships and partnerships with them. Not a guarantee of a job, but trying to invite, because those vacancies, you can't always compete on money. You can compete on opportunities. You can compete on other advantages. So we gave a series of recommendations if you had a chance to read those. And my firm has done extensive work with cities around the country on talent management, how you're attracting and developing talent. So just to share that. In that regard, going clockwise, I think it's time to update your class and compensation plan. It's been several years. You have to be market competitive when you go out and attract candidates. Market-based in the jurisdictions that you're competing with, and within the industry, and within the occupation. So again, part of the challenge there, or part of the opportunity there, is to raise the baseline, not necessarily just to pay, but to help the organization be more deliberate and intentional in how it's recruiting talent. One of the things Nate has done, I'll give him a pat on the back here. He's put together a really clever ad for maintenance workers. You get a chance, and I think I put it in the report. He put together some pretty creative language to try to attract people that want to join his Parks and Recreation department. And he posted that on Missouri Parks and Recreation Association website. Suffice to say, the city has to be more aggressive in targeting with how they're recruiting talent. Online, social media channels, you have to be a lot more aggressive to find the talent. They're out there, but sometimes I think there's missed opportunities. The next one is to undertake a technology master plan. As you all know, technology is ubiquitous. Departments are relying on it, mission critical. I heard this from departments. We didn't spend a lot of time examining this in particular. Public Works spends an extensive amount of time on PubWorks, which is a proprietary software that Mike and his crew uses extensively for fleet maintenance, for capturing workloads, for service levels, all sorts. The police department has a myriad of different software. Parks and Recreation has a couple of different pieces. The opportunity there is, as we know, technology is a driver. It's a deliverer of services. We recommend that at some point in the near future, the city undertake a technology master plan, the equivalent of a capital improvement plan. However, the focus is on technology. Getting beyond the fiscal year updates or the biannual, but looking out further into the horizon. If anything, this pandemic has shed a light on how mission critical service technology is in delivering services. And then the final one is periodically evaluating outsourcing. All the departments use it. We didn't spend a lot of time on this, but that was one of the recommendations, periodically looking, how are you using contractors as a contingent workforce? And all cities have that as an option. So let me get to the final slide here is Parks and Recreation. We recommended to phase in over a 3-year period the addition of 7 maintenance worker. In addition, in year 1, we believe that position of facilities and event coordinator for Centerview would be mission critical. We outlined, I think, a pretty compelling argument about how to make Centerview more attractive. It's not just a facility that's going to generate business. As you all know, you're competing with a lot of different venues, especially right now and going forward. To devote somebody full-time to be on sales and marketing, to run events and go out and generate business is a great way to generate revenue for that facility. It's a beautiful facility. I camped out there when I was there. At the same time, it's not going to sell it by itself. But maintenance workers in particular, to try to increase the number, to help Nate and his crew diversify and be able to be more proactive about maintenance, and also just tend to the business at hand. Police, to phase in over a 5-year period, the addition of 20 sworn officers.
Mr. Ibarra,
Yes.
this is Councilmember Holman.
Yeah.
A question about Parks and Rec, and I note that you made I would assume the generic recommendation of 7 maintenance workers, perhaps that's specific, and then the very specific facilities and event coordinator. Did you and Mr. Mustine give any thought to the addition of a horticulturist in this?
Well, yes, we talked about that, and what I provided in the report about for staffing levels for all 3 departments, we didn't get down into how those positions should be structured, the job descriptions. We relied on the department directors in consultation with the city manager and the assistant to decide what positions in particular would those maintenance worker be comprised of. So if it's a horticulturalist, if it's an equipment operator, but I think at the discretion at the department level. So it's not simply just 7 more maintenance worker or simply just more officers, but for them to have input about how the department should be structured with specific job titles.
I see. Thank you, sir.
Absolutely. So in the police officer, as I was saying about police, that would essentially double the size. Now, remembering the recommendations were based on our analysis, the inclusion of some of those national standards, evaluating against comparable jurisdictions, looking at service levels, and try to project a little bit into the future, just based on trending. That's a little bit more difficult in local government to know what the world is going to be like a little next year as far as service levels. I think these recommendations will help you move faster, sooner, into providing the quality and quantity of service that you want to maintain. So again, as Councilmember Holman asked, and just to repeat, in the police department, it wasn't saying you need 2 more sergeants and another detective. We believe that's at the discretion of the chief in consultation with the city manager to determine how best to allocate those staffing levels. The final one was Public Works to phase in over a 3-year period the addition of 13 maintenance workers. And again, similar to Parks and Rec and public and police, it wasn't to decide exactly, is somebody an equipment operator? Are they going to divide? My sense is Mike's going to look at possibly some dedicated crews for water sewer, where he can really devote not only responsive maintenance, but proactive maintenance and really increase the certification for some of those crew members to deepen their expertise and to improve the proactive of maintenance. Again, that's a great opportunity when he has more people. The size that he has now, I think it's just more of a challenge. Many of the crew members in police, public works and parks do have certifications. But I think what listening to Nate and Mike, they want to increase that so they have a little bit more of a specialization. Remember, your organization is going through some growing pains, not just the numbers of the residents, but also the organization. So you may start to see a little bit more of a shift with certain employees and departments of a little bit heavier focus on specialization. Not like a large city would have, but I think you're going to be moving in that direction where you have some people that are devoted strictly to certain functions. At the same time, you're going to have a group of people that are highly versatile, cross-trained in many different areas. So that's a good hybrid. And again, I think that's one of the things that makes the city of Raymore attractive as an employer is that no 2 days are alike, and the diversity of what people do should be emphasized in how you recruit. Because people often want that. They want a variety. They want to expand their skill sets, and they want to work with an employer who's interested in helping them be cross-trained. Does that mean you're going to lose some people sometimes? As I heard from all three departments, you are getting poached by other agencies. I would offer to you that's often a compliment because they know you're a builder of talent. It's no fun to be poached, but you can't always compete on increasing their opportunities for promotion. That's just the nature of the size of your workforce. So that's the final slide. I'm going to stop sharing if that's okay so you all can see each other, if that's okay. Yeah, Councilmember Burke?
So as far as putting out all these FTEs, eventually, if we had all 40, we'd probably be looking at around $3 million to $4 million more in annual budgets for compensation, if I was to make a short estimate.
Okay. I know Mr. Fuhrborn had looked at the dollars and cents of this. We try to be practical about this. It was the challenge sometimes in projects like this is we're given a dollar figure to say work against that number. Mr. Fuhrborn did not put those constraints on us, and we felt as though what you were looking for was what's the best of our advice for the numbers, and knowing that we're very practical here, and knowing that's why we phase these in over a series of. There's no perfect number about how many years. That's entirely up to mayor and council, and we offered that recommendation in the report. If you want to take longer, I think increasing it sooner than later is going to be a benefit to maintain the services that you want to maintain at the level that you want them to see delivered.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Any other questions?
Mr. Mayor,
Yes.
I had a quick question. Looking at the brochure that the study you provided,
Yes.
the management and planning portions of each section, is that the output from the directors, the department directors?
Some of that information, yes. There was a little information that we lifted from some of the information they provided us. We thought some of that information would just provide a basis as you read through the report.
Okay.
We tried to, each department has a different story, and we tried to start off with the beginning, the middle, and how it continues because there's no end. But we used information at the beginning of their structure and just some of the basics of their hours and their services, just as a way for you to kind of dive into what's our analysis and what's our recommendation. Because I know you're always reading a tremendous amount of documents, and I considered Mr. Fuhrborn and Mr. Ike, as well as you, as the audience for this report. So we tried to make it complete and comprehensive, that you could read it in its entirety, and you would have a really good sense when you finish about what the department does, its profile, how it's working, and what are the recommendations. I hope that was helpful as you read that.
Reginald, you're on mute.
I had a question.
Yes, I'm sorry, Mr. Mayor, for not having my space bar down. But I also echo Mr. Burke's comment because I was looking at the numbers as well and was like thinking from a compensation package, what that looks like in the out years. That looks currently what we have today compared to what's being proposed here was very interesting to see, particularly in the Parks and Rec. I was curious on, and we can have separate conversations later with the position of that facilities coordinator. And how that would work, just from my understanding there. But definitely this study here was definitely very interesting information. Good in that we're able to see, good and bad. Obviously highlight some of the bad, but it's good that we see it now and understand areas of improvement. I look at it as a SWOT, there's those strengths. We definitely have some strengths that we can work on, some weaknesses, and all those other things. This was very, in the time, like you said, that we are right now in this growth trajectory that we have, that we can take some opportunities to set ourselves up for success in the future. And I appreciate the level of effort. Definitely a lot more reading to do on this, a lot more to digest than just this night. In these 4 days that we've had this packet in front of us, some more conversation to have on it. But I appreciate your time and effort in this. And I want to say, while I have the mic, to Mr. Fearborn for taking the forethought to put this into practice, to put this into motion, for us to have this document as something for the public to see. There's just not us internally looking at ourselves. We had someone come in and kind of look at us with a clean set of eyes and compare us to others. So we have a little benchmark to kind of go forward and say, okay, this is how we are trying to position ourselves. So again, thank you to Mr. Ibarra and Mr. Fearborn and staff for taking the time and answering these questions earnestly and giving us some good information, because you're making it very hard for us as the council now going forward on when you come before us again as a staff on recommendations for this. So again, thank you to all that was involved.
We appreciate that.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Barber.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Patrick, a couple of, kind of pick your brain just a little bit. I mean, obviously you go around, you see other cities. I take it that our situation that we're in is not unusual. What impressed me about your report is we do have very high citizens survey on all of our departments. And my real question is, and I think our employees give us high marks as well.
Absolutely.
Where's our critical mass that with our growth, obviously we're working our folks pretty hard by the looks of this. We're could be stretching them even thinner if we don't do something about it. Where's our critical mass? I mean, your expert opinion, when does our services stop? Our employees are not happy and our citizens are not happy.
Well, I think that's a really good question, Mr. Barber. And I would offer, it's not scientific. I would offer that the situation where you are right now is that you're possibly at a critical juncture for the volume of growth, the impact on maintenance, the customer satisfaction survey scores, which, as you noted, I failed to mention, are high. Your employee satisfaction scores. It's a critical intersection to say now is a good time to invest in additional employees as well as your own employees to avoid some of the challenges you have by working people beyond. We're seeing a tremendous levels of burnout across the country for a variety of reasons. And I know you don't do things out of fear. You're trying to be mindful of those. And one of the things, again, I thought was very healthy. And to Mr. Townsend's point, and I appreciate the feedback, we fashion ourselves as a spotlight, as a flashlight and a mirror. So we try to shed light on things and then hold a mirror up. We thought it was very revealing, not only from Mr. Fearborn and Mr. Eke, what they shared with us, shared with me in particular, but the three directors about how they were identifying that they saw those citizen satisfaction scores. Their concern with is how do they sustain those in the face of increasing volume of work. And I think that's a very honest, candid response, and I think that's indicative of the character of those people running those departments. I've done many of these over the course of my practice, and some people just aren't as honest, aren't as forthright. So they shade it, or they cloud it, or they mask it. So I think that's a good spirit that they see, that they're not reluctant to disclose. They're challenged by how to maintain that quality of service. Absolutely, you have a tremendous amount of devoted employees that want to please and want to sustain that level of performance. They don't want to come in complaining, but they also, at the same time, they want to acknowledge that the volume is increasing to the level where they're concerned about maintaining that service. And I think that's healthy. And you're right, most organizations go through this. A lot of cities, though, are in denial. They think it's a money issue. Well, we had more money, we'd do more. Well, that's part of the agenda here. Part of your strategy is how can you do more with alternative revenue sources? And this is a way to do it. And you know that 80% of your general fund is wages and salaries, and it'll probably always be that way. So you have a heavy investment in your staff. They're mission critical. So I hope that responded to your answer, your question, Mr. Barber.
Thank you, Patrick. Anyone else?
Yes, Mr. Mayor. Mr.
Mr.
Circa
Circa.
here.
Yep.
Thank you, Mr. Ibarra. I appreciate the study was excellent. And any business, and the city is a business, and I owned my business for years, whether it's 2 or 3 staffers or 100. This is a good report because you're going to have strength, you're going to have weaknesses. It's good to bring those out. If you don't really understand your weaknesses, you can't fix them. It's good that you have an idea, and now we know which direction to take. We have a great city staff, great city manager. They have worked wonders. And this, I appreciate Mr. Fearborn bringing you in and doing this, but now we open our eyes to what we really need to do to be positive for the future. We see the numbers we have. I mean, they're incredible. I mean, when I started reading these numbers per capita, what we have in acreage and the parks and rec and the police and the maintenance on the streets alone, the numbers are phenomenal for what we have working. These people are working at 140%, and they're doing a great job. Like you said, we need is what can we do to better it, work our way in our budgets to hire more, to do better for the future and do it now. Because this is, I think, a critical turning point when you see these numbers. Mm-hmm. Like any good business, we got a great city, got great staff, great people. We can get through this, but now we know the direction to go. And this was a great step forward for us, the study. I thank you for all you've done here. I think it's a great study. It's a great opportunity for us to look into this deeper and go forward with this opportunities that we have to better ourselves as a city.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you for the feedback, Mr. Circo.
Thank you. Anyone else? Yeah, I think from my perspective, what it does, it just kind of opens the door for observation for us that allows us to take these things into consideration when we move forward. Because it doesn't mean right now that we're not doing an adequate job. Our survey says that we're doing a great job and with the people that we have. And so we have to be mindful that we don't want to, I always preached it when I was police chief, that you guys don't want to get behind hiring people because it takes so long to catch up. But it does give us an opportunity at each and every budget session to look at where we can expand and potentially move forward by using a whole criteria of different observations that are occurring rather than just a flat number based upon national averages. And I think the report does give us that flexibility to think that way. So if
I could just make one final point, Mayor.
Sure.
I'm sorry to interrupt. Mr. Fearborn and Mr. Eakey and I spoke about this a number of times, that from the inception, in the middle of the project, as we wrapped it up, to say, look, absolutely, there's increasing staffing levels is necessary. At the same time, in conjunction with that, we really strongly recommend the city to accelerate its approach and its talent, its hiring practices, not just about compensation, its approach. Because you can double the size of the workforce, but you've had numbers of vacancies for months, going back 5 and 6 months. And I'm not putting that at anybody's feet. Some of it's the challenge of the time. Some of it's a variety of reasons. I just think those have to be worked in tandem internally for the organization to really get the biggest bang for the buck. And I know that's a cliche, but as with any organization, it's not just posting and waiting. It's really being more aggressive to, as I say, build your own minor leagues without guaranteeing people a job. But to go out and pull more people in as potential candidates, whether internships or externships or, however, entry-level programs, journeymen, any of it. There's lots of opportunities to bring people in, but you have to go out and get them.
Sure. Ms. Abdelgawad?
I just offer that as a recommendation.
Ms. Abdelgawad?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So you've mentioned a few times the point you just made, and so I'm curious, we don't have numbers to compare that. So are the other cities around us also having openings that are lasting months? Are the other cities around us doing that same thing? I've been on a few different, and I asked that question kind of tongue in cheek because I know the answer. They are, as are businesses in other industries.
Right.
I've been on several committees talking about workforce and workforce development in Cass County and our metropolitan area. And I know that workforce is a huge challenge, not just for the city of Raymore, which kind of makes your point. You maybe need to be a little more competitive, but on the other hand, it doesn't necessarily mean that we're doing something wrong. It's a challenge everyone has. It's not a unique challenge to us.
You're right.
To make that point.
Yeah, I agree. And I think as we did throughout the report, we're trying to identify opportunities to capitalize on your strengths. You do have devices in place. What we're trying to do is accelerate and emphasize and be more aggressive about some of those. You may, if you, when you get a chance to read the report, how Raytown is recruiting people into their police departments. And we reference actually examples from other jurisdictions, not to say it's about cutting and pasting, but you're competing for talent. And unless you're competitive in the marketplace, that you're a known quantity as an employer, it makes it even more difficult. And that's where sometimes as an industry, local government has been a little bit not as aggressive, not as assertive, not as modern in that. So it worked for a long time. Now's the time to sort of revisit that approach and modernize it and accelerate to compete, to attract and compete for talent. So I just offer that. You're right. It's an industry. It's a challenge across the country, and some industries are a lot more aggressive about how they're going out to attract their own talent. So.
Thank you. Anyone else? Mr. Fearborn.
To all of those other questions, of course, the council will remember that the genesis of this entire project was staff realizing when we started to see the lofts go in that things had definitely changed for the city of Raymore, and we knew and we have known for a couple of years now that this moment was going to come. With the use tax on the ballot, what we had asked for was, and my first line to Patrick was, we need a down and dirty staffing study for our boots on the ground folks. As you can see, he has given us a tremendous amount of value-added information in this report, and we thank him greatly for that. He went beyond our expectations as far as what was provided. Do not want to lose sight of the near-term form of this, which is we want to use this independent report as the bedrock of our informational campaign in the upcoming use tax. However, the importance of the other items, the recruitment practices, the professional development, the evaluation process that you see in these reports, in the weeks and months to come, we have to be looking at those. We would be doing a disservice to the great information that we got if we didn't try to continually grow professionally in the city by taking advantage of those recommendations and tailoring them to the city of Raymore and to our various departments and people. So the council on all of those other items, some in the near term, some as we move forward past the ballot issue, the council will be hearing on a regular basis from staff, and staff is already doing some planning on that, on how we're going to be addressing each of those other recommendations, because they are valuable as well. They're very valuable as well.
Thank you, Mr. Fearborn. If no one has anything else, that's a great segue into our next item, which is the use tax campaign. Patrick, thank you again for everything and all your hard work. It was nice meeting you or seeing you
Nice
again.
to meet all of you.
Take care of yourself.
Thanks for the opportunity, and go Chiefs. See you all.
Yeah, there you go.
Go
See you now.
Chiefs.
Absolutely.
Go.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
With that, I'll turn it back over to Mr. Fearborn, and we'll move along on the second item tonight.
Thank you, sir. And I will ask Mr. Icky and Ms. Harmer to make a presentation on item B, use tax campaign.
Thank you, sir. Really starting to kick off tonight the April 6th use tax informational campaign. And if you've been with us long enough, you know that the campaigns that we try to run out of the communications office really try to make those as focused and informational as possible, but also to have a real emphasis on customer service and allowing folks to ask questions and providing opportunities for folks to ask questions and really learn about the issue that we have on the ballot. And so that's why going forward, we're going to have not only several opportunities for folks to participate in public meetings, but also to participate in our upcoming community conversation, as well as have staff available to ask questions. But what I wanted to do tonight is go through the campaign itself, or the informational campaign itself, and really talk about and highlight the 5 areas that we want to ensure that as we're going out to educate the public about the issue, these are really the 5 areas that we're planning on highlighting and emphasizing. And then I'll turn it over to Ms. Harmer to talk about the tactics and how we'll be doing that. Really, the first one that we're going to be spending a lot of time on is really educating folks that this isn't a tax increase. We really are looking at really trying to emphasize and educate folks that we are using the exact same sales tax rate, but when the courts declared that in order for cities to collect a use tax, it had to put it before voters, we wanted to also emphasize the fact that residents won't be paying double, or they won't be, paying an excessive amount. They will be paying the exact same sales tax rate, whether they're shopping at a brick and mortar store here in the city limits, supporting one of the mom and pop shops here in town, or whether they're shopping with an Amazon or a Wayfair or a Chewy. So it would be the exact same sales tax rate across the board. It's just called something slightly different. The second item that we really want to emphasize is also that while folks are going to be purchasing things online, we sometimes hear the argument, well, if I'm purchasing it online, we're not using the same city services that, say, a shop in town would. And really, we have discovered, and as we've looked at cities across the state of Missouri, several hundred counties, cities, and taxing jurisdictions that have passed this, one of the things that we find over and over again is those online shops and those online stores do in fact use several city services, whether they have their delivery vehicles using the streets that we still need to maintain, or whether they're using our law enforcement officers, our police department, if a package gets stolen off the front porch. There are a number of services that still get used that we need to pay for and need to be able to account for our residents. And our residents expect, whether they shop in person or online, that those services are going to be available from the city. The third area we're also going to really touch on and talk about a lot, and I think this has become even more apparent as we're kind of getting to the light at the end of the tunnel when it comes to COVID, is online shopping is no longer simply something that is exclusive to a millennial generation or something that is up and coming. Online shopping is truly here to stay. It is something that everyone participates in, and we're only seeing it grow. In the past year, the state of Missouri, the gross tax receipts for online sales was roughly $30 million. And although we don't have the entirety of 2020 in yet, just in the first half of 2020, we saw those online sales tax receipts increase by 20%. And so we know as the state is collecting a use tax that those numbers are going to increase. It goes to show that online shopping throughout the state, regardless of whether regardless of where you are, is something that is going to continue to increase in usage. And number 4, another big area, and this is where the staffing study that Mr. Ibarra really highlighted, that the revenue generated from a use tax would allow the city to collect roughly $1 million in that use tax from online sales. It would go a long distance in helping us jumpstart the needed services and bringing in the personnel that the staffing study report outlined. While we would not in the first year be able to bring in every single individual as recommended by the report, as Mr. Fearborn has talked about in the past and as we've highlighted at meetings before, it would be a great jumping off point to ensure that not only are we in that snapshot that Mr. Ibarra talked about, are we keeping up with the service levels that are needed, but that we're also keeping those customer satisfaction levels as high as they have been in the past. As we start to kind of get to the tail end of an ETC survey now, we're really interested to see how those customers or those citizen satisfaction numbers, if they continue to stay up, as we continue to grow, we want to keep a close watch on those trends. And so this is going to be a revenue source that really is going to benefit those 3 areas highlighted by that staffing study. And finally, the 5th area, and this is one area that I think we cannot understate or overstate enough, is this really is going to level the playing field for a lot of those shops that have called Raymore home already and those businesses. When COVID first started shutting down a lot of what our typical day-to-day life was like, I know Ms. Harmer and Mr. Gress in the Economic Development Department, they put in a lot of hours to ensuring that they were reaching out to the businesses, that they were talking to folks here in town that owned a shop, advertising whether those businesses were still open, that they had curbside service, because we recognized early on how important those local businesses are to our community and how important they're going to be in the future, even as we see the retail landscape just shifting overnight. And so what we want to ensure is that we're able to level that playing field so that online retailers are participating at the same level as our local mom and pop shops. And so I want to turn it over now to Ms. Harmer to talk about how we're going to be getting those 5 messaging points out to the community over the next couple of months.
Thank you, Mike, and good evening, Mayor and Council. Can everybody hear me? I'm on the wonky microphone. That was kind of the first formal presentation from Mr. Iggy on the informational campaign for the use tax that will be on the April 6th ballot for our residents. We will be making formal presentations at every board and commission meeting in March. If any of you have any meetings with any of your organizations, please let us know, and we'll have a representative from the city make a presentation if we can. We will be sharing all of the information that residents need to have to make an informed decision on April 6th. And we want them to certainly know what the use tax, exactly what it is and what it is not. And I do have some beginnings of some marketing informational pieces that we'll be mailing out, both a brochure and a postcard in March to our residents, with information on how to contact us, where to go, just basically the facts about the use tax, and if approved by voters, what it would bring to Raymore. And then, of course, all of the normal, we'll have a website or webpage set up on our website. We'll talk about the use tax at our community conversation coming up on February 23rd. Information will be in our weekly report, and we will, of course, share like last day to register to vote and election day information, and any of that specific information that our residents would need to know to make an informed decision. And I will also have pieces for you to take if you need to speak with anyone, any of your residents also. So, and I will have those for you in March. And that is all I have.
Melissa, did you have something else to add, Mike? I had a question.
One, I just wanted to let all the council members know, not only will we have the items that you can hand out in person, but we will be doing 2 mailers, knowing kind of how complicated the educational campaign around this can be. So we'll be doing one at the beginning of March and then one again at the end of March, just so that we ensure that everyone is able to understand and know what's coming up on the April ballot, but also has the opportunity to get to our website. If they have questions, can always call, so that they are ready to vote on the day.
So my question is twofold, and Mr. Zur kind of lived through this with his Chamber of Commerce and Independence and such, but they have the Proposition P that the City of Independence did has a great website that is still up that you can look at, where they have a Q&A, where they talk about what is a use tax, how is a use tax different from the sales tax, will I be double taxed for purchases, will I pay a use tax if I don't shop online. There's a lot of things that they've gone through purposefully to let people know what it does and doesn't do, and the rate that is charged. Because I understand that also if you do purchase online, it is only for those purchases online for vendors that have a physical location in Missouri. Is that correct?
That is not correct.
That is incorrect, sir.
Because it talks about local use tax can only be collected if a vendor has a physical presence in the state of Missouri. Only purchases from vendors who do not have a retail store or distribution center in the state of Missouri are not subject to local sales tax or local use tax. And so that,
It depends
I
on
didn't
the-
realize how different their use tax potentially could be from ours if people are out there studying what a use tax is, like I just did, and find out it's different than potentially what we're going to be collecting.
No, our ballot language specifically calls for online sales.
Out-of-state vendors specifically.
Okay.
And depending on the timing of when these came in, and we can certainly and will certainly have a web presence page for this, that in spite of the detail of that particular item, but depending on when a particular organization put the ballot language on, you'll remember the old yes means no and no means yes.
Right.
And that's when the whole Wayfair thing was also churning at the legislature, and the whole Wayfair issue centered on having a brick and mortar presence either in the state or even the locality where this was being charged. The new legislation that yes was yes, no is no, can apply to any online sales.
Okay. So it's probably changed in the last year and a half since that. Yeah, okay.
Dramatically.
That's why it's different than what I'm reading. Thank you for clearing that up. Are there any questions from anybody for Ms. Harmer or Mr. Ike? Yes, Sonia.
Mr. Mayor, I got a question.
Sonia's up.
Oh, sorry.
Mr. Mayor, I think that list of questions you just read was very helpful. I think people are going to have a lot of questions about this. So I know that kind of our typical marketing material includes big pictures and few words because we know that people don't necessarily want to read a lot, but I think that this is an issue that people will read up on.
Absolutely.
So while some pictures and few words will be great for some people, I think it's also going to be really, really important to have the in-depth information, which I don't feel like we've necessarily had in some of our previous campaigns. So I just hope we don't lose that piece and ask for you to be sure that it's included, as well as the stuff that catches people's eyes.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Barber.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Is there a database we can go to, or is there a list that shows what communities have already passed it and are implementing it right now?
There is, at the state level. We also looked at City of Lee's Summit when they passed their use tax most recently, had a good list of comparable cities that also had passed a use tax. We'll absolutely be posting that on our website, and to kind of address what you'd spoken about, Councilmember Abdelgawad. Our hope is that with the first mailing that we're going to be able to do more of an in-depth piece, so it won't just be the postcard, but it would be, the nice glossy folded piece that would have in-depth information, with the second piece being a reminder to vote postcard. But at the end of the day, all of our pieces are going to drive folks to our website, and we fully anticipate our website being full of information. I know Ms. Harmer has already developed an extensive FAQ based on questions that we've seen asked of other communities, and questions that we have already been asked, knowing that folks are going to want to go to that website or even call us directly, because the website itself is also going to be a great informational piece for our folks internally, knowing that our officers or our public works guys, parks maintenance folks are going to get stopped as they're working and asked, what do you know about this? Can you answer this question about me? And so we want to make sure that everyone from top to bottom has the opportunity to find that information, to read that information, and have access to it.
And what we know from the cities that have been successful in passage of the use tax is every piece of information, it is going to be critical that we let the public know exactly what we are going to do with this money, down to the exact number of officers, the exact number of detectives, the fact that we're going to be putting on an event coordinator for here. We have to give them those numbers every single time, and nothing but personnel.
Anyone else have anything?
I do, sir.
Mrs. Belgawad. Sorry, she had her finger up first.
I'm fastest. Just a quick comment. If we are expecting for people to stop our staff while they're out, will they have materials that they can hand to people too? I know sometimes when you're just chatting with someone about something, they're not going to hold all those FAQs in their head. They can direct them to the website, but it's also very, very helpful to just have that printed FAQ list to hand to somebody, or even a business card that says, yeah, here's the website where you can go find more information.
Absolutely. We'll be distributing those materials internally. Absolutely.
And that we are also going to be conducting training internally because, as I spoke with the management team on this last week, that we would be meeting with each of the individual departments in the very near term, within the next couple of weeks, because we do want them armed with materials, but we also have to be very, very careful with them that they remember that this is an informational campaign only. So when they've got those materials in front of them, we want them quoting the materials and then handing them to them and not moving too much further than that.
Mr. Holman, did you have something?
Yes, thank you, sir. Two-part question. First part, Mr. Icky, I'm assuming the tax would be generated and captured based off of delivery to an address within the incorporated city limits of Raymore. Is that a correct assumption?
That is correct.
As opposed to point of sale purchase from the location of the computer, correct?
Yes.
Okay, and then the second question is, we're asking to capture only, I've kind of asked this before, previous meeting, but we are only asking to capture the city of Raymore's portion of the sales tax, i.e. when I go to Lowe's and I pay 9.8% or whatever it is, I'm not just paying the city of Raymore, I'm paying to South Metro, I'm paying to the library district, all the taxing districts in there. We're just capturing our small portion of that, correct?
That is correct. And the state is already collecting its portion of the use tax. So if you are purchasing something online today, you are already paying a portion of that use tax.
So in essence, the difference between me buying something at Lowe's, for example, at 9 point whatever percentage, almost 10%, versus online, I'm looking at between the state and the city, something around 5-6%.
2.5.
I'm sorry, what was the question again, council member?
Missouri plus Raymore. What does that equal?
Raymore is 2.5, and I believe Missouri is 4.445.
So nearly 7.
7% versus the almost 10% I would pay at a brick and mortar location. Okay, thank you.
It's actually below 9% in some areas of the city that aren't within TIF districts. Mr. Circo, did you have something? Nope? Okay.
So,
Anyone else?
I'm sorry.
Before we move on to, because I know Mr. Fearborn has additional information. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Your Honor. There have been, since we first presented this to the City Council a couple of weeks ago, there have been a couple of developments that I did want to update you on. As we had told you then, the recognition that one of the pieces of information that we want to be sure gets out there is number 5 from Mr. Ickey's list, that this levels the playing field for our local businesses. So to that end, as we had informed the council we were going to do, we did approach the Chamber of Commerce in light of the fact we have data that 207 of the issues that have passed in the state of Missouri have passed with the endorsement of the local Chamber of Commerce, whatever the political subdivision was that was putting it forward. And when we approached the Chamber of Commerce, they have declined to endorse it. They do indicate that they will, any information we get to them informationally about it, they will push out to their membership, but they will not be providing their endorsement on that. A second issue, pretty serious issue, is that the Metropolitan Community College system, most of you may know, is going to have an issue on the Harrisonville School District and on the Raymore Peculiar School District to bring those two districts into the Metropolitan Community College districts. In both cases, what it means is that they will be imposing, if it's passed, they will be imposing this year a 23-cent levy increase per 100 of assessed valuation on everyone's home who lives in Raymore Peculiar School District. A concern we have is I'm going to read to the City Council the question associated with this particular issue that will be on the ballot. Question: for the purpose of providing greater affordable access to quality higher education by providing in-district tuition rates for residents within the Raymore Peculiar R2 School District, shall the Raymore Peculiar R2 School District be attached to the Junior College District of Metropolitan Kansas City, Missouri, effective the 22nd day of April, 2021. That's the sum total of the ballot issue language. There is no mention, as you may have noted, of a levy increase associated with this particular action. In speaking with Mr. I will publicly one time call this, in my opinion, a somewhat deceptive ballot language. Mr. Azur pointed out another issue in that even the ballot language is supposed to be informative, but not advocate for the issue. That opening statement of providing greater affordable access to quality higher education, it bumps up against that ceiling of advocating for it considerably. But again, the most egregious thing to me is the fact that they don't call it what it is, and that is a levy increase within the ballot language. So those are two developments since we have started the campaign in the background, and I would be happy to answer any questions the council might have.
Which, if my math is correct, equates to $460 a year on a $200,000 home. Anyway, go ahead, Mr. Burke.
Can't hear. He's on mute, sir.
Hello? He's looking for a space bar. No, he's looking for the, is it? Nope.
Okay, there we go.
There you go.
Okay, so this is the MCC issue is the exact reason that my son, who just came back from basic training, is saying, hey, how come you all tell us that A+ is free to go Longview? It's not free. He's trying to convince me that it would be cheaper for him to wait to go to CMS in the fall or UCM and let the Army pay for everything, whereas A+ is not paying for everything like I've been telling students for 20 years.
Yeah, I know when my daughter went to Avila, she did get a reduced tuition because of the A+ program for her first 2 years, though. So I know that the districts do recognize it, but I don't know to what extent. I don't know what kind of discount we get if we are part of that districting with the MCC.
I coached at Avila, and that was just simply an incentive to try to get more residential athletes.
Yeah. Did you have something else to add, Mr. Fearborn? I think somebody else had questions.
That's what I had, sir.
Mr. Barber? Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Back to the chamber question. Mr. Fairborn, did the chamber give a reason for not wanting to endorse
You want me to take it, or you want
use
to take it?
tax? And
I can
the
start.
second component of it is, if that's the case, I mean, obviously there's some local business here that would like to be competing more on a level playing field with the online sales. Maybe our strategy would be go to them and get an endorsement from them.
Well, actually, I think there's a misunderstanding on the part of the board over at the chamber. I was absent for the board meeting that day, and we weren't able to advocate the actual rules that exist within the bylaws. And so when I attend the board meeting in February, I plan to bring that to their attention because it does allow for us to, as a chamber board, allow the chamber to support an issue like that. So I think it was just a misunderstanding on that, and so I'm going to approach it from that perspective and try to see if they'll do it. Now, from their perspective, they think they're supporting it anyway by pushing out emails, as Ms. Turney does on a regular basis, because we are a member of the chamber, that we can forward things to her and she'll push them on out to the chamber membership. So it's basically getting the same information out there. But I do think that a concerted effort to get the chamber to actually provide potentially a resolution to support the issue is more meaningful, and hopefully I can advocate for that with that group.
And specifically what the mayor is talking about is there is a section of the chamber's bylaws that says the chamber will support local businesses, will support legislation for local businesses, but that they will not endorse a political candidate. However, it is silent to the use tax, and of course, the chamber's bylaws come from, a lot of these chamber's bylaws are just simply similar to our many sections of our code. They're taken from other chambers' bylaws. And so when I spoke at the beginning about the fact that 207 chambers have endorsed the use tax for their political subdivision, I believe that the legal interpretation would be that candidate is separate from a particular item. Would that not be the case, Mr. Zer?
I would take that position.
Yes, Mr. Burke.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So within purveyance of my union working, we never endorse a candidate because that usually implies money is being given towards the campaign. We recommend an issue to our membership because that way we're not implying that we're giving money towards it. Is that a legal trip up that could perhaps help us, that they could recommend that people go for it, and then it's not an endorsement where they're putting money directly towards the cause?
Well, and our request or our appeal to them involved no money whatsoever. So whether the language was endorse or appeal, as long as we could get them to publicly lend their support to it, we've kind of taken as our guiding line, and again, Mr. Icky mentioned it in 5, that one of the mayor's original statements on this was it levels the playing field for our local businesses. What better group to lend a hand on that by nodding that they think that this is a good thing than the Chamber of Commerce?
Anyone else?
Mr. Mayor,
Yes, Mr. Holman.
Councilmember Holman, I hope that you're successful in talking to the chamber and getting them to see our position on this, and clearly the position of over 200 other communities within the state of Missouri. If possible, I think it would be good to have Mr. Sherborne and Mr. Zer there, again, if possible. But we heavily, and I emphasize the word heavily, support the Chamber of Commerce in this town. If they can't support our positions, which support their own members, I've got some strong issues with that, sir.
I understand.
So I hope you're successful in your efforts.
Okay, thank you. I know that Mr. Gress and I we're both on that board, and both of us will be advocating. Mr. Serco, did you have something?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I agree with you 100%. In the years of the chamber president, yeah, we don't endorse a candidate. We don't get politically involved, which is correct, but this is not a political endorsement of a particular candidate. So as you read the bylaws of the chamber, you're correct. They're part of the city. We are a member. They can endorse or request heavily this tax. There's nothing wrong with that. I think, again, they're just reading it wrong and assuming it's an endorsement of an individual. And in your meeting, you guys will be there. I wouldn't mind being a special representative there too. But this is something Michael and them need to understand. This is something they're allowed to do. It's legal to do. It's within their purview. Their mission statement is direct. It always has been to sustain and grow business within a community, to highly perform and educate and move forward with the quality of life. To not only sustain the business they have, to help sustain the ones they have as they improve and add new businesses. And that's the mission statement of the chamber, basically built around businesses and the growth of the business to the city and the city to the chamber. So yeah, you are correct.
Well, I know that you're intimately aware and familiar with the president of that, and maybe talking to him a little bit ahead of time might be helpful.
I will do that.
All right, thank you, sir. Anyone else? Okay, I know we have something under other, do we not?
I don't believe so.
I think maybe we've covered it all.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, all right. Okay, we kind of talking about several different things there. All right, so with that said, unless somebody else has something else they'd like to bring up this evening, we will stand adjourned. Thank you, everybody. Have a pleasant evening. Stay safe. And maybe a month from now, we'll be together again. I hope.
Go Chiefs.
Go Chiefs, that's right.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, theirs has occurred more recently than Independence.